Okay, yeah, I'm recording on my computer. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Cheryl, why are you in the gloom and Bruce is in the light?
Well, that's just the way it is.
She could turn some light on if she wanted to. Yeah. Well, you have those windows open behind you too, Cher.
I know. Do I need to turn a light on?
Well, if you turn a light on, it'll help. Unfortunately, those windows are our main source of air flowing through the boat we live on, so.
That didn't, the light didn't help.
Oh, dim lights.
It's okay.
It's okay. It looks like there's like a mechanical monster behind you with big kind of eyes kind of glaring.
Yeah, that's the roof of the back deck. Little storm lights and everything.
Right.
Guess another couple of minutes, just in case
Yeah,
anyone else is
maybe.
wandering in.
Yeah, good idea.
Looks like we're going to be a small group, which says something about the topic itself.
Yeah. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Amy. Faye.
Hi, Amy. Faye, yep. Donna, Eric.
Hi, folks.
Hi, everyone from Ontario. I mean, I'm from Ontario, not just hi to anyone.
I'm also from Ontario.
And Faye's up in Sudbury, she says in the chat.
Ah,
Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
Well,
Are we going to roll?
I think so. It's almost 2:05. I feel like good to get started. Well, I want to welcome everyone here today. My name is Jason Locke. I put my name on my screen here, and I'm on the west end. Well, right now I'm in the middle of Toronto. I live at Avenue Road in St. Clair, but I work on the west end of the city at Islington United, and also have the great pleasure of serving as the chair of Music United right now. And I wanted to welcome everyone to this webinar, and especially thank Bruce up front for the work he's done to pull us together. A few important notes about our meeting today. One, it's being recorded, so just wanted you to know that. It's helpful to be able to share these kinds of resources. So we're recording it. Also, if you're not used to using Zoom, which probably everyone is at this point, but just as a matter of hospitality, there are a few important features that might be helpful to you. First of all, if you open the chat function by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom of the view screen, you might be able to see some ongoing chat in the side chat bar. And of course, you can change the view of the meeting just by toggling between speaker view and gallery view, which just gives you a different sense. The speaker view highlights the person talking, and the gallery view gives a good sort of equal representation view of who's in the meeting. Today, we are going to be talking about topics that can be hard to talk about. So I just want to invite you to contribute to the conversation with care and consideration, to enter into deep listening, and contribute think about the things we say and contribute wholly. For people who are in the space, who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, we value your wisdom. We are grateful for the ways you will contribute to the conversation today, but we also want you to know that we are not here today so that you can just teach us the whole time. We don't want to put that burden on you, and we want to do the hard work of figuring out how to have conversations about race, holding your voices and cherishing your corrections, and moving in this direction the best we can. So that said, I would like to offer prayer for our conversation today, and then I will punt the ball to you, Bruce. Let's pray together. Gracious God, we pray that you would open our hearts and our minds so that our conversation can be encouraging and moments of learning and teaching one another how to have meaningful dialogue and discussion around the various ways that race, issues of race and racism enter into our daily work and ministry and into our lives, into our society, into our church. Help us to make positive and healthy steps and teach us along the way. Help us to be open. We pray all these things through Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. It's one of the ways we exert our privilege as white settler people in Canada is by always accepting that people become really uncomfortable when we're talking about race. That, we don't challenge each other. We just accept. You let things roll off of you. All of that. But that's part of what it means to be a part of the dominant society that functions. So, just want to name that up front. I also want to name that it is okay to be angry about what we're saying here. That is a normal human reaction. Hopefully we can channel anger into growth and understanding and become something more than we are through wrestling with the things that really immediately grate upon us. So if people, this is not a webinar that is meant to be a bunch of one way from us to those who are gathered. This is meant to be a conversation to help us all grow in our ministry and music in the United Church of Canada. So, all of that being said, I thought I would just start out with a few reflections, some of them personal anecdotes, and just some based upon my reflecting, getting ready for today. Alan Whitmore, who's on this call, was with us, but I was going to ask, was anyone else in Thunder Bay for General Council in 2006? Not seeing any other hands going up here. That was, Alan and I were there with the whole team that put together More Voices, our hymn book supplement. We were there leading music, introducing new resources from the hymn book. And there was at one moment in that General Council gathering where a whole crew of people got up on the platform. And I looked up and said to myself, even before they started to speak, I said, there's our Francophone Ministries team, there's our Journey with Black People's team, there's our All Native Circle Conference and the BC Native Ministries people, and you name it. These were people who are from that non-mainstream United Church, white mainstream United Church demographic, English-speaking demographic, all up on the platform at once to say something, and I just went, something's about to happen here. And that was the moment when our denomination received the challenge to become an intercultural church. And that it made me think. I could feel the Spirit moving in me in that moment. I was already on an intercultural journey. I was already doing this kind of work if you've used More Voices, you've probably recognized the amount of non-European, North American white content that is in the book, an intentional attempt to help us access resources and so on, to help us sing outside of our cultural norms. And so I had been actively engaged in that work for a number of years. But then I had to reflect on some of my own journey. I am white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, male. I am all of those things that make me one of the most dominant culture people in the country. And yet I grew up in a bit of a cultural bubble. My parents were both theology students. They met in theological college, so I'm a double PK, as they say, preacher's kid. So I did grow up very literally in the church, and into a family that always taught us to be xenophiles rather than xenophobes, and people who sought out other cultures and so on. So my exciting moments when we got to the big city as a kid, from many of our different pastoral charges that I lived in around Western Canada, was to go to Chinatown and dive in and experience all those beautiful things that I grew to love, like preserved plums and white rabbit candy and all of those things that have become such a part of who I am. But at the same time, I am a product of the culture I grew up in, and so I just assumed that Canadian meant me primarily. Yeah, it's taken me to quite recently to really grapple with that. And while I've always been welcoming of others, new Canadians, and I've spent many years living amongst in mixed community, Indigenous, non-Indigenous community, and so on, and I'm very comfortable in those situations and living with the cultural differences, acknowledging the fact that I benefit from privilege just because I am white and born and raised here and so on is a difficult thing. So I guess one of the moments where I first really encountered how much I am a product of white Canadian society was the first time I was at a large gathering, and somebody was at the front of the room, and they were literally, it felt to me, forcing us all to sing in Spanish. And my gut reaction was, whoa, how dare you do that to me? Why can't we just sing this song in English? And I had that complete cultural freak-out moment. And then we switched to the English, and a big sigh of relief. Oh, thank God, something I'm much more comfortable with. And yet, rather than just shutting down, that forced me into a number of year journey into, well, this is me rejecting what is normal for Christians throughout the world, singing in their own mother tongues, expressions that are different than mine. And so how can I overcome my fear of being wrong? There's another part of my cultural identity, always assuming that what I know is right is right. How can I get through that to the point where I'm comfortable being vulnerable and not being the dominant personality in the situation, not having my needs addressed first? So that's been a big journey for me. And another big part of my journey has been, I've worked as an intercultural musician for many years. I spent about half of my working and musical life in the church, serving local community, Crossroads United Church here in the Vancouver area, and the wider church through Music United, through workshops and events and so on. And but the other half of my life is, I'm the token white guy in a South Asian classical music ensemble. And that's a totally different place for me to be, because that's where I have learned to be the other. I've learned to be comfortable being the odd one out, not knowing what's going on. My good friend Amarjeet Singh, who's a tabla player I've worked with for close to 2 decades now. One day he just called me up out of the blue and said, come to my house. And Amarjeet used to call me up all the time, and I never exactly knew what was going to happen. He'd call me at 6 o'clock, and I would think, oh, okay, he's probably inviting me for dinner, and dinner would be at 10:30 or 11 at night, because that's his culture. So it's like, oh, so I learned to shift all of that, all those expectations. But this particular gathering, I walked in the door of Amarjeet's place, and right after me in walked 12 Sikh holy men visiting from Punjab in India. And that was the gathering, just me and them and Amarjeet. And the whole evening, and here, I thought it was going to be a casual evening, just Amarjeet and me, and they're all really well dressed, and I'm dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, and oops. But I sat there for that whole evening as all of this conversation flowed around me, none of it in English. Occasionally somebody would lean over, maybe once every half an hour, and say, I know you didn't catch that. Here's what they were saying. And I was very grateful for that, but I had to learn how to be okay to be in that environment where, I'm not in control. I'm not in control. I don't know what's going on. And that for me was another awakening to what it's like for people who wander into our congregations, who are struggling with English as a second language, who are struggling to, adapt to the way we do things in our congregations, to the way we are, and just, barely having a grip on what's going on around them. And because I've had some of that experience myself, just some, a little smidgen, it makes me much more accepting of where other people are, particular people who are outside of that mainstream white settler norm for Canada. So, lots of things have brought me to where I am. Even though I have always thought of myself, or increasingly thought of myself, as a fairly woke individual when it comes to issues of race and identity, I've learned some more things just in the past few weeks, just through doing some basic reading. And I put a PDF up in the chat just for folks who want to do some further reading and reflection. This is just a few notes on intercultural questions and so on, but a couple of published resources that I found recently that I found helpful. I still found helpful, despite the fact that I'm partway into this journey myself. And one of those resources is Ibram X. Kendi, who is at Boston University working in anti-racism. And his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Because Kendi makes the distinction, I think this is really important for us, that the dichotomy is not between racist and non-racist. Non-racist is kind of our default way as white folks in Canada and the States and so on, our way of saying, oh, well, I'm not a racist. Trump is a racist, for example. You can always externalize racism and point to people who are more racist than we are. But if we always try and externalize it and say, there are people who are racist and I'm not a racist, we're not acknowledging our own implicit racism, because we benefit just by the fact of being white folks in Canada. We benefit. Our privilege gives us that place in society. And so Kendi's distinction is between racist and anti-racist. So it's the active edge. It's the people who challenge racism when they encounter it, when you see it. And I don't know about you, but I see racism on a daily basis when I'm out in society, and that's me as a white person. So it's not generally directed at me, but I see it happening. And increasingly, if we want to get ahead in this country, then we have to become far more active in the way we challenge racism, challenge it. So the other book that I found really helpful, And this one I've been hearing about for a number of years. It's been popping up in pop culture and television and so on. White Fragility, written by a white author. But that's partly why it's so effective, because it's a white person communicating to us white people about race. And she's getting at that notion. And this is an important piece, I think, for us in United Churches. White fragility means that we don't really deeply identify our racial identity. We think of ourselves as Canadian, and everyone else is, an African Canadian, South Asian Canadian, and so on, right? All these other hybrids who are here in our midst, but it doesn't get at who we really are. We are all racial people, both the way we're raised and just because of the way, we look, the way who we are. And she gets at that cultural norm that we have, that you don't challenge each other. That fragility means, because we're also fragile in our identity, that nobody wants to challenge the norms and the privilege that we all enjoy. So both very helpful reads. I see some more resources popping up here. Oh, Faye has just told us about a book study online. Yes, on white fragility. That's good. Yep, very good. There's some more resources popping up too. Oh, Jason's telling me I need to resend the document. So people can't see it once it's up there, Jay?
I think it's again there. Amy reposted it, Bruce. Anyone who comes in after it was originally
Gotcha.
posted couldn't see it. So
Okay.
I have to, but it's there again now.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Very good. Yeah, so, I'm in the midst of this journey. I'm at the point now where I consciously notice, if I'm watching a show, is it all white characters? I'm intentionally seeking out content that is explicitly African American, explicitly, just cultures other than the one I grew up in, so that I can be, I get used to that feeling normal to me, right? So it's not just, everything I consume is not just a dominant culture narrative. So that's me. That's where I'm at. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on their own journey. I know Jason has a few questions for us he'll toss into the mix, but I would like to open this up for some conversation too with others on their experience or on this topic.
Hi, Bruce. I was just going to say a little bit, maybe.
Hi, Matt.
I guess where I'm looking at is in a practical matter as well, in terms of how we share non-Western songs liturgically. So thinking of, how can congregations also be more aware and respectful when engaging non-Western songs? Our understanding our purpose for its use, but also exposing, the North American mainline congregations to different forms of music, while, confronting our biases and cultural superiority assumptions one may have. Thinking of, so like ways, can ways we share non-Western songs unintentionally perpetrate racism, as a question, So it's more of a practical matter about how we share songs respectfully, and these were just some of the things I've been reflecting on.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you. Yes, as global songs from outside of the mainline white culture in Europe and North America, as they have come into our hymn books, and really that has been over the past 70 years roughly, starting around the 1950s when we started to see this repertoire really starting to come in, and increasingly. Originally, songs were taken and they were recast as Western hymns and reframed in a way that would be more palatable to your average congregation. But increasingly, we're trying to seek out arrangements and contextual information that root them more closely to original context, and trying not to just appropriate songs from other cultures and using them in a different way that wasn't originally intended. So there are challenges in that. It means for us as musicians, we have a lot of work to do to understand where a song is coming from, to understand original context, to learn the piece well ourselves, so that we become that conduit for teaching in a respectful way, and we become that fount of intercultural knowledge for our congregations. What was I just thinking of? Well, I guess I'm thinking of, I've heard of congregations say, well, let's sing an African song. And if you ask, why do you want to sing an African song? For one thing, let's sing an African song. That's a very wide cultural blend on that continent alone, right? So that in itself is a stereotype, but people think of it as lively, energetic music. So are we just using it because it brings life and energy to our congregation? Or are we using it because it helps us sing in solidarity? So that's partly how I've tried to approach the issue of why do we sing songs from other parts of the world. For me, it's because we're praying in solidarity with our sisters and brothers, and we're praying in their mother tongue, which just brings us so much closer. I've had folks from my congregation who might be visiting another country, and all of a sudden they start to sing something that somebody already knows, and there's a beautiful moment of connection as Christians between two different cultures when we do that. So it's the intent, I think, is the most important thing. I think we can also get caught in the need to be perfect. I know I've often said to people, try doing a song from West Africa where, there's still cultural and musical differences in West Africa, but there's a lot more unity in the way that people generally approach song in that part of the world. But that ideal of all a cappella, maybe with some percussion or some kind of accompaniment like that, is an ideal. But if you experience worship in many West African congregations, they're doing things like using the instruments they have available to them. So there might be a keyboard, there might be, some brass instruments. People do what they need to do in their own context anyway. So our ideal of trying to achieve a culturally perfect expression according to the original context, sometimes we have to let that go, do the best we can, and make sure that we're teaching people to pronounce language and to embrace cultural forms, musical forms that might be different than what they're used to, but at the same time then give us permission to not be perfect. I know when somebody comes up to me on the street and is speaking really basic, hard to understand English because of accent, etc., they'll often say to me, "Oh, I'm sorry for my English," and I say, "Don't be sorry. You're speaking to me in my language. You are the one who's seriously disadvantaged here, not me." So I do my best to accommodate. So I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit, but do you want to push me a little bit further on your question, Matt, or introduce something else to some of your reflections? Or not, that's okay too.
Yeah, I was thinking also in terms of copyright, like who's getting credit for these arrangements? When we look at non-Western songs, like is credit due as well? Sometimes these things can be taken advantage of too. And yeah, like are those, who create the songs getting, that rightful copyright, the respect that, or is someone else, claiming these songs, as their arrangements and so These are some things. Yeah.
Yes, very good questions, Matt. I know in the past, this is less so now, but in the past, major American corporations would copyright arrangements and translations and so on, and then own the rights to those songs the way we have them in our hymn book. Sia Hamba, for example, copyright the Walton Music Corporation. And unfortunately, and under American law, it's whoever owns that first copyright owns it. So it's very hard. Part of our work in More Voices was to try and break first world ownership of songs from other parts of the world. So we were very intentionally, if we could get a hold of a translation that came from the original context, we would use that instead. Even if the English wasn't perfect and so on, we would use that. We would take an arrangement from the original context. So, Kamana o Io, which is a song from Hawaii, Joe Camacho's song, it had been taken by John Bell in the Iona community and put out in a John Bell arrangement and so on in one of his collections. But when we were putting it in the book, I in correspondence with Joe, he's like, no, I never said yes to that. And so with the arrangement we have in More Voices, while I love to sing the vocal harmonies that John Bell gave us in the Iona Community Collection, what we have in More Voices is Joe's arrangement and Joe's copyright. Same thing with some of our songs from West Africa. It took us extra months to be able to track down somebody who actually did that arrangement. In some cases, it's somebody who's working 60, 70, 80 kilometers into the bush away from all forms of modern communication. So somebody had to go and track them down and put a permission agreement in front of them to give permission. And we were, I won't say we're totally at the forefront, but we were largely at the forefront of doing that and bringing that to light as a way forward. And most collections, hymn collections in North America since More Voices have started to do that as well. And I know for our next project, for Sing 2025, which is already underway, a digital platform with a little bit of new supplemental material, but mostly creating a platform for sharing all the resources that we have in More Voices, Voices United, and Nos Voix Unies, our French language collection. We are doing a concerted effort with our partner One License to bring all of those copyright holders who aren't currently on the platform, to bring them onto the platform with royalties flowing directly to them rather than through some other publishing arm. So that work is going on and will continue to go. There's, unfortunately, I don't know what we do with things like Sia Hamba, aside from insisting that we have new arrangements and new paraphrases that can break the original, break their copyright. But yep.
I wondered if I might jump in here for a moment. I was looking at Lauren's comment in the comment section, and it's really connected to something I've been thinking a lot about lately. So Lauren, I think these topics kind of overlap a bit. I personally struggle with teaching global song in a church context. I grew up in more evangelical traditions and in churches that were more multicultural, and not necessarily intentionally intercultural, but were more multicultural in general. My very first church I worked at was about a third, what I would say, white, about a third African Canadian, and about a third a lot of other things. And it was a very beautiful and interesting training ground for a musician. And we used to do all kinds of things there. The worship team itself was pretty diverse. But lately I find myself hesitating to teach global song. And I'm conflicted about it because on the one hand, I want people to hear and experience the language and words and styles of other people from across the world. I think our own music, collection of music is lacking without the complementary music of people from across the globe. And on the other hand, I find it difficult to find the balance of, I don't want to colonize music. I also don't want to go to the other extreme of mimicking musicians in other places. And this is, I find, a bit of a white church fetish sometimes of trying to make the music. I mean, we're not in West Africa, and so it's not going to sound exactly like that. So, you know, what's the point? Where's the line there? Where, at what point does our presentation of the music almost feel like a musical blackface in a sense? It's like, are we going so far that it feels awkward and uncomfortable? And because of some of those questions, I have tended to shy away from some of the global song we have, because I'm not sure how people are going to react to it or are going to engage it. And I struggle with that. And at the same time, I work with friends and have composer friends who have said to me, especially a Jamaican friend of mine who's a composer and an artist, and she has said to me, you know, these are the songs I wrote, and they're also a gift to you. Use them, please. Sing them in your congregation. So how do we take songs that have been gifted to our community and use them, present them, offer them as vehicles for people to learn and to worship? And how do we do that with integrity? And I'm starting to think more and more that in order to do that, there has to be a teaching component. I mean, we can learn a lot from just singing a song, but if we don't actually have conversation about the songs we're singing, or offering some background or around the composer, or knowing that we have sort of been given permission in a sense to, I mean, there's also, I think, a subtle racism to that. And what I mean by that is, why am I assuming that someone from another culture is going to be offended if I sing their song wrong? I mean, I won't be offended if someone takes a song I've wrote and sings it wrong. So there's a real conflict internally there around how to present and offer and carefully honor music that is outside of my cultural norm, which is also an issue, because I've lived in communities where people have given me songs and offered me opportunities to do things in languages and in styles that are not necessarily my first go-to. So what I just did there was offer you a whole bunch of really complex inner workings of my mind that make it hard for me to approach global song. And there's no solutions in that, but I would really feel benefited from conversation if any of you have walked some of that interesting journey there. And of course, we keep working at it together.
If I could comment on this, I can remember back when I was part of the development team for More Voices. One of the things that I did in the church that at that time I was the music minister at was, okay, we're going to sing through this book. Stupid mistake, but that's okay. We were going to just sing through the book. And it was a very wise gentleman who has been a friend now for years because of this, who said to me, why are you doing this? What is it doing to help me find out something more about the Creator? And that was a moment that caused me to stop and think, okay, why am I doing it? Is it just because this book is coming out and damn it, we're going to learn it? Or is it because it's going to help the people in this church family know something more about God and about how to act or interact or take their faith into the world? And so one of the things that I became very intentional with and had to fight the clergy on a little, but that's okay. I've always fought clergy, so that's not a major problem, is that it had to have something to do when introducing something new or when singing. It had to have something to do with some theme within that worship context. You just couldn't throw it in because, oh, we're going to learn More Voices 29 today. It had to have some context. And it was interesting because this same friend said to me, you know, I really don't like this stuff. I'm not standing up. I'm not singing it. Don't get me clapping. I'm not. The list of things he wasn't going to do was far longer than anything I'd ever thought of. And one day his wife came up to me after church and she was roaring with laughter. And I said, what's the matter? And she said, I caught Ivan tapping his toe. And that was his breakthrough moment, was when he suddenly realized that he didn't have to totally understand everything that was there, but that something was speaking to him. Something was helping him move in a positive direction. And so one day I must admit that I had the vanity of really feeling really good when I saw him actually standing up and moving his body. But for him, that was a breakthrough. And I said, okay, Ivan, so how does that feel? And he said, well, you know what it makes me feel like? And I said, no, what? He said, well, this is just part of what I do. He said, I can now stand up and sing Praise My Soul, the God of Heaven, and move my body. So what it was doing was freeing him into just becoming more involved. But I really feel that when introducing music, it's got to have an integral part of the worship experience that we're placing it, because if not, it just becomes a performance. And that's fine if that's what we want it to be, but I'm not convinced that that's really what we want to do in worship.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, I think we're coming back to that two things, the notion of context and the notion of appropriation or not. I do think we need to shy away from songs that have been, where the melody has been taken from another culture and words from someone who looked like me have been written to them. And that's what we sing. You know, hymns like May the God of Hope Go With Us Every Day and in Voices United, it's an appropriated melody with new words that suit our context and so on. So getting back to the notion of songs, as Jason and Matt were saying, songs that have been gifted to us for that purpose. You know, that was one of our issues with Indigenous First Nations repertoire, both in Voices United and in More Voices. I know in the More Voices process, I had some leads on a lot of really good songs I wanted to bring into the collection from, you know, a young composer in the Squamish Nation nearby here and so on. But often we were ready to say yes to something, and at the last minute permission is not given because the composer himself didn't have permission from his community to share that outside of his context. And so, you know, we had that issue with one of my favorite songs in Voice United, "O Great Spirit," that beautiful piece that comes from up in the Bella Coola area of BC. It was, you know, permission was never given from the community for that song to be shared in that way. And so it's a hard song, but it's a difficult song to sing for that reason. So making sure that these are songs that are meant to be shared and that people intend to be shared, and then making sure that we're, you know, that we're rooting them in a sense of why we sing them, for sure. As Alan was saying, others were saying that the song has a purpose in the context of worship for that day. That we are helping people understand original context, understand where it comes from, and that we're helping people embrace it and sing it for what it is, not just using it, as I said earlier, as a vehicle to liven up our worship with rhythm or whatever. That it becomes more than just entertainment, right? That's what we're not about in church, even though many of our people just want to be entertained. it's about prayer, it's about community, it's about our relationship with God and with each other. And so making sure we're sensitive to all of those things, then I think, the fact that we're outside of our cultural norms and that we're singing something that is hard to sing because it's outside of our cultural norms, our language norms and so on, is good for us. It's good for us. We learn, we grow together, and it helps our people understand that the way they practice Christianity is not the way everybody practices Christianity, and it helps us become part of the worldwide body of Christ. So it is a form of prayer.
If I could jump back in for a second, I'm going back to Lauren's comment earlier. Also, she was pointing out that in the broader music community, there's a fair amount of really helpful discussion and really important discussion around how we portray characters in music and opera and music theater and such, and just some questions around how that connects to church music. And in our contexts, church music is more collaborative, more participatory in a sense. We're not really role playing as much as we are offering together in community song, sometimes soloistically, but still with that kind of communal sort of feeling. I apologize. They were testing our fire alarm intermittently, and you just caught that. And I think it's important for us to sort of see some of the distinctions between the broader community's discussion around how to honor roles in, say, an opera and in congregational participatory sorts of worship, because when we have that experience all together, that's a little different than sitting and absorbing or listening or portraying an individual role. And I'm thinking about some of the great composers, songwriters, people who put music out into the world. They have it published so that it can be performed or sung, offered into a worship context. It would be odd for us to not purchase, say, the music written by a Black composer because we're not sure we can perform it as white people or as mixed congregations. So there's some, and in fact, supporting and purchasing and performing music that's been composed by a variety of people will enrich our worship, of course. But so I just want to draw that distinction between the wider community's conversation around who should be performing or who should be embodying and who perhaps shouldn't be. And it definitely is an important conversation right now because the broader world is having it. And church, I think we need to be thinking about it so we also have some thoughtful theological and musical items to back up our conversation. But that collective congregational experience does make our singing different. It makes it a little bit unique, I think. So wanted to throw that into the mix.
Yes, thank you, Jay. Yeah, I do think there's a distinction between, in particular, between commercial and corporate worship interests. I know I used to play in a Trinidadian soca band for about 4 years, and the guys in my band were extremely upset that the Police, who were still a fairly big band at the time, who appropriated reggae and ska musical culture and brought it to the mainstream with Grammy awards and you name it, that they had invited one of the great reggae bands from Jamaica to open for them in their concerts on tour. And my friends were saying they should be opening for this band instead if they're really honoring the original context. So I do think there is a difference between commercializing music from other cultures and and sharing it so it breaks us out of our cultural norms, so it becomes a vehicle for prayer with the global community, so it becomes a way of understanding people who are different than us and the way that they worship and live and make music. So a big difference. Anyone else want to jump in on this topic? Donna? Oh, okay.
Well, I was actually looking at the chat, but I have.
Oh, sorry.
And it, about the whole issue of recognizing in myself and in the choir that I work with and in the congregation I work with, and I guess the community as a whole, about is there a line, and I think there isn't a distinct line between tribute and curiosity and expanding and enriching music with the intention behind it versus appropriation. And in the events of the last, 6 months, but year, I got thinking, because a couple of years ago, and our church is kind of well known for its Easter and Christmas cantatas we do, and that a couple of years ago we did a cantata, I think it was the Easter cantata, largely based on spirituals. And in my mind, I'm thinking at that time, we were a totally WASP choir. And so I've gone back and forth about, was that an appropriate thing to do? Because when you know better, you have to do better. But also, was it okay to do that? Because there was tremendous joy and tremendous response, and people in the pews like really getting into the music, and so I kind of go back and forth about that and where I am in my wokeness. The other piece I guess I wanted to share is in other life that I have. I sit on the board of directors of an expressive arts therapy training school that I graduated from along the way in my nursing career. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a very interesting, very intense couple of hours conversation with current students and grads of the school of different cultural backgrounds. And the topic was sustainable systemic change. And of course, that's not something that you do in a day or at a seminar or even probably in our whole lifetime. But that really, and that's also the group that I put up on the chat line, a couple of books that that seem kind of important in that conversation. I was typing white fragility, Bruce, as you were exactly speaking, white fragility. And that was interesting too, because when we looked at it, every member on our board of directors of that, and it's an expressive arts therapy training, and our practicums and placements are largely with people who are vulnerable because they're marginalized in many, many different ways. And it kind of, okay, so we have a board of directors that's all white. We have large population, the faculty members, although diverse in many other ways, are not terribly multicultural. And so that was really, really an eye-opening conversation with the students and the grads who were of other cultures. And it's the awareness, I think it's the intention, but so there's a whole lot of stuff in my mind that probably I'm kind of rambling on about, but yeah, and the other piece is now sort of I realized that I'd made an assumption, because over the last couple of years we've had a beautiful singer, a woman from Jamaica, who has joined the choir. And every time we do an anthem or something that has a spiritual component, or a component that's based on a spiritual, I've always selected her to have the solo line, and so I now have to question myself. Why do I do that? Is it because she is the best person to sing that particular line, or am I making the assumption that she should be the one to do it? And is that right? Maybe that's right, maybe it's not. Anyway, so I think bottom line, there's so much that when you start to wake up, when I've started to wake up to it, that there are all those subtle nuances that maybe it's been way too easy to blindly blunder through before. So thank you for doing this conversation today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Donna. Yes, Amy in the chat here has reminded us that there's a difference between, there's conversations going on about difference between appreciation and appropriation. And yeah, that is a good distinction. That's some of what we're saying, that if, why, always challenging ourselves on why we sing a song, why we're offering that song. And all of this, it's all really messy. I know when we were putting More Voices together and we were putting in the arrangement for Hush Hush, Somebody's Calling My Name, Stephen Lewis did that arrangement for us, a beautiful musician in the African American tradition from, where is Stephen these days, Alan? Is he still in Atlanta?
Stephen Lee. He's in
Stephen Lee.
Atlanta.
Okay. He's a brilliant musician. He had put in the kind of language like, oh my Lord, what shall I do, what shall I do? And we had the debates over, does that feel like appropriation, us putting that kind of language into our book? Does that make sense? And we asked some of our folks in the United Church how they would feel about that, and we heard back from folks of an African cultural heritage background that no, we should leave that as is. That is the cultural expression, and that should go in like that. So it still feels awkward for me to sing it as a white song leader, but honoring the intentions given to us by the creators of the repertoire is an important part of what we do. We also just need to overcome some of our sense of cultural norm. I know a number of years ago when we were launching More Voices and we were on tour, we were at a cathedral congregation, and I was teaching Hitso Tsubu no, the beautiful When a Grain of Wheat, the piece from beautiful Japanese song in More Voices. And I asked the choir that I was working with after we'd learned it, I said, could you see singing this as an anthem, as a good way of introducing a song from Japan to your congregation? And the immediate reaction was, no, oh no, we could never do that. And I said, well, why? And they said, because it's in unison. We have to sing in harmony. And I thought, but that's our cultural norm in many United Church congregations. That's not the world's norm, right? Some cultures, unison is beautiful. I work with musicians in a South Asian context who have no concept of harmony, no understanding of the way I think. When I hear a melody, I hear harmonic implications. It's just the way my brain is wired from my cultural conditioning. But these are people who have a really, really powerful sense of melody and of the subtle distinctions in ornamentation and so on that I have to struggle to catch, and yet in terms of harmony, it's not part of their vocabulary. So that's part of appropriation, as I was saying earlier too. Appropriation or appreciation is learning to appreciate music as it's given to us, as close as possible.
I wonder if I could throw out another thought. I was wondering how, in dealing with race and racism, especially in song, and how we approach it, I wonder if there will be any thought around the 2025 project in 2025 around how white theologies sometimes depose other theologies. I'm very sorry, that's my place again. I'm trying to talk between the fire alarms. And by that I mean, we're very hesitant to think about or talk about or include theological persuasions that make us a little uncomfortable. And I'm thinking especially of some aspects of liberation theology or Black theology or queer theology or feminist theology or other theological persuasions that have something to say to the wider Christian experience. Charismatic theologies, contemplative theologies. There's so much richness in theological diversity, and I know that there are also traps in certain areas of theological persuasion as well, and that in the United Church of Canada we are working to be really careful about that. But I wonder if along the way here we might be silencing some voices as we write and collect songs. That's just a query. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I just wonder if our collections are perhaps not as complete as they could be if we were listening to some of those other voices.
Thanks, Jay. Yes, the challenge in putting hymn collections together is always the communication piece. You know, reaching into communities that are outside of our own communities to access repertoire. I know we had those challenges in More Voices, but it's our challenge again with this new collection to, you know, and it helps that I've been doing intercultural work in the United Church for well over a decade now, so I've made some connections with people, but that's what it comes down to. So like really, and I came up here in the chat too, the question about you know, anyone know of any African Canadian hymn and congregational songwriters? Well, that's the thing, to be able to, we have to put so much time and energy into reaching into communities that are underrepresented in our collections and really trying to pull some of that repertoire in for use in a respectful way, but then also be okay with, as Jason says, and I think Matt was alluding to too, some of the fact that what might come to us is quite different than what we're expecting, and we might say, gee, you know, can I ever even sing that? So I think when it comes to gender issues and so on, we as a church are getting better at it. You know, we put some repertoire in More Voices, put it out in the sampler that we thought would shock the church, and it didn't. There was very little negative reaction. It doesn't mean that we're all there collectively, but we're getting far more used to singing and talking about gender issues and how they affect our corporate life. But this will still be a growing edge for us. How do we become more comfortable with theologies that are different than our own theology? You know, in the More Voices process, one example that we've always tried to deal with is the imagery of light versus dark. And you know, our justice folks at the national office were challenging us to not use light and dark imagery, which as a general principle I'm very much in favor of. But what happens if that light dark imagery is coming to us from another culture where it's central? So there were some choices we made in that collection to leave things out that I wish we had put in, because they're deep and meaningful and helpful to us, even though they challenge us in those kinds of ways. So,
Bruce,
yep.
Going on about the light and dark issue, because I remember being one of the people in the hot seat for 3.5 hours at head office on that one. And finally, it was interesting how people began to realize that maybe it wasn't light and dark so much as what does light represent in your mind and what does dark represent in your mind. Because in fact, darkness is quite a remarkable thing. Without darkness, there would be no life. All creation needs a time of darkness or a time to rejuvenate. And so it became that whole business of just making sure that we were not saying that light was good and dark was bad. It was being very careful as to what the connotations to those two words were.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, I do think that is some of the distinction, and you see it even in Voices United, because in some cultures, some traditions, darkness is the positive thing, and I'm not just talking about skin color and so on. I'm talking about the safety in darkness that you find when you're sheltered and safe. You're not as vulnerable in that situation. So we do have hymns like "Holy is the dark, joyful is the dark, holy hidden God," and so on, like attempts to reclaim. So we just need to keep challenging our notions of what's acceptable and broadening our sense of what works in our context to accommodate the great diversity that we have. Pat, you're...
Yes, I'm so sorry I've just come to this at this late hour.
Welcome.
It completely went out of my head, although I was looking forward to it, and it just went out of my head. So here I am, very late. But the conversation about light and dark is one that interests me a great deal, because that is one of the things that I try to be very, very careful about in writing, is not to not use those words, but to use them in ways that are positive in both senses, so that it's not the sort of dichotomy of dark and light in some of the usual ways that they are seen, but that dark is celebrated as light is celebrated, darkness is celebrated, black is celebrated, so that these are not words that we are afraid of, but that we can incorporate them in positive ways into our language. So that's something I'm trying to be very, very conscious of when I write.
Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts they want to share?
I mean, just to piggyback on that, I think the challenge around that conversation for me is not just the reclaiming of language like light and darkness, but also how do other groups, other races react to the imagery of light and dark, or white and black, which is often what people are thinking when they sing light and dark. So there's an unlearning that has to happen there. So it's great for us to work towards that, but to always, I think, have our ear to the ground around how other people from other racial groups are experiencing those metaphors, and just being aware of the work that needs to be undone there, perhaps along the way. Did that make sense? Okay. I'm especially thinking because some biblical imagery actually uses that whiteness metaphor, which gets often equivocated with light and dark right from the scripture. So it can be quite challenging.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, that was part of our issue in our More Voices discussion too. We agreed with in our conversation that like Advent, for example, which takes place at the darkest time of year, when light is that symbol of presence, God's presence in our midst. That's part of our Christian expression. And so therefore that kind of imagery is, we should be able to continue using it. There are other kinds of imagery that we need to give up, and we no longer sing the grand old missionary hymns, do we? Because they're overtly racist. They presume cultural superiority on behalf of the people who are gifting the song to the rest of the world, and all of that. But there are images that need a lot of nuance and context.
I'd just like to add to that, Bruce. Sorry to butt in again, but because I'm going to have to leave in a few moments, I have a weekly Zoom meeting with my church choir, and seeing we can't sing together, we have picked topics, and the topic that they asked me if I could help facilitate, and we've been doing now for 9 weeks, is singing our language. So today it's rather an appropriate thing for me to hear all of this before I go into what's happening. But I think one of the things that I'd like to just share is that it's really wonderful that we are having this conversation, and I'm very thankful for it, but I'm also very aware from the time I spend with my church choir family that there's a lot of education to be done, and that people just don't get it. Like you were talking about the business of not singing missionary hymns because overtly they suggest certain things. I would suggest to half my church choir, it doesn't overtly suggest any of that. Now, when it's pointed out and when they start looking at it, then they say, oh, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be singing it as much as we are, or in that way, or whatever. But it's astonishing to me for people, and I would suggest that every single one in my church choir has got more formal education than I do, because they are a very bright group, but it's fascinating how they really, unless you really think about it, you don't get it. It's the research we need to do as leaders so that when we can present a song, we're presenting it with some form of authenticity and some form of knowing the background, so that in fact we are honoring. But then there's the whole educational piece. And I think that is immense. And it's something that maybe needs another webinar.
Thank you, Alan. It comes down to how we present our music in our collections too. I know in More Voices we made the decision to with songs that came from another language, to place that language first and then the paraphrase below. That's an intentional decision. I had people say, well, why don't you just put a phonetic version of the Spanish in rather than the Spanish? I say, because then Spanish speakers can't sing with us. They're trying to figure out the phonetics. So there's always challenges. I know the fact that we did that in More Voices means that others have followed us. The Mennonite Church in North America is putting out a new collection, and they're following our principles, the same ideas for how to present songs. So that will always be a challenge for us. Like if we interline the characters of Japanese with the music, then the only people who can sing that are people who read the Japanese characters. If we put the standard Romanized phonetic version in that instance, then it opens it up for wider use. But if we don't also include the characters on the page, then we're limiting the use of the song to just non-Japanese people, just as one example. So ongoing challenges for us as a community. But I think some of our biggest barriers are the barriers that we ourselves set up as song leaders. I know my wife Cheryl and I were at a church in the suburban Toronto area a number of years back, and had led an evening of singing, and just the gathered community. There's 40 or 50 people there from the church community and surrounding area, and we had sung 4 or 5 songs in different languages, and I saw people enjoying the experience of trying to sing along and absorb some of this language. And that night after the event was over, we were billeting with a musician from the community, and the musician said to me in conversation, "Oh, my people just won't sing in other languages." And I thought, didn't you just see them singing in other languages? You're probably telling me that you're not comfortable singing in other languages, and so your discomfort is affecting the whole congregation. It's affecting your sense of them and what they're capable of in terms of learning and growing and stepping outside of their norms. So yes, we have a lot of learning to do ourselves in terms of context, in terms of being comfortable teaching a song in another language, if that's what we're being asked to do. But it's our role, right? as song leaders to take some of this on, to provide that education, to do the best we can, and to be comfortable with not being perfect. It's, I know people have said to me, my accented Spanish means so much to them. Cheryl and I were leading music for Montreal Ottawa Conference one year, and we were doing as much French language repertoire as we could, even though our French is just this side of brutal. We were doing it and leading it, and I had a lot of our francophone folks coming up to me and saying, thank you. This is the most French we've ever sung at this gathering. Oh, and by the way, when you sing this word, sing it like this. They're offering me helps right there on the floor, and I'm just thinking, wow, that is, thank you for, we have to be okay with being vulnerable and being willing to learn, keep learning ourselves and not being the expert, and yet at the same time being willing to ride that comfort, right? Our congregations like to be comfortable. They like to sing what they like to sing, so they resist new music in general, but then there's the barrier of language or just an unfamiliar musical context as well. So, how do we teach that? How do we lean into that as leaders? I guess I could toss that out as a question too then. What would people need? What kinds of resources, what kinds of help do you need to, in your context, to deal with white fragility, white privilege, shaking up the cultural norms in your midst?
It would be, I would be interested to hear of your experience, Bruce, over the last 10 years or so in sort of creating this sort of intercultural context and, in your own community. I would certainly be interested to hear how that happened, because I think, the church that I attend is very social justice oriented, very much so, an affirming congregation, but we still are very very white. We have a smattering of people of other cultures and races, but it just doesn't happen by itself. There has to be some intention, some intentionality to it. So to hear how that has happened in your community would be very interesting to me.
Thanks, Pat. I know, my own church community is a community on a journey, that's for sure. They have affirmed that an intercultural identity is central to them, and now they're having to live into it. I know because I was already involved in intercultural work when I started working with this is an amalgamation. I've been with some of them for 17 years, and with this Crossroads as Crossroads for 11 years now. And when I came there, this was a majority white congregation in a suburban area of Vancouver that was surrounded by, the largest Punjabi community outside of India. There's mosques and gurdwaras and Buddhist temples and everything around us, and we were a little white enclave in the middle of it. So I challenged them to, they already saw themselves as a justice community and you name it, and an open and inclusive community, but their worship expression was as white could be, and that dominated the cultural narrative. So part of that journey has been, literally, and I do mean forcing my choir to become comfortable with singing other languages. They don't sing in other languages all the time, but they're used to seeing it appear in front of them, and they're becoming quite good at some languages in terms of interpreting and singing, and making it be a norm in our midst that we won't always worship in English. And so, inviting scripture reading in other languages and singing, of course, but just, trying to help people on that journey, and then having the church put its money where its mouth is in terms of intercultural ministry. So we do other things. We support intercultural and interfaith gatherings in our community. We host an intercultural interfaith jam session, a monthly gathering for folks to come together and share songs from their cultural contexts. And, yes, we've had some success that way, but at the same time, the only gathering that we have that is majority non-white is that intercultural jam session. That time when our South Asian friends of many different faiths show up, when there's black representation, there's Korean representation, you name it. There's a really interesting cultural mix and language mix happening in that event. But our own folks support it some. I'd like to see more of them come so they have that experience of not being the dominant culture in the room. But it's a journey. But they've stuck with it, and they've affirmed it as being really important to their ministry. And year by year, they're learning to grow into it. That's frustrating for me, how long it takes to change. But that's part of it. Not being afraid of jumping in and starting the conversation and the awkwardness. That's really important.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
I'm on a phone, so I have no idea who else is here except the person speaking. Are there many people here?
We've had a few people come and go. We're a smaller group than I had hoped, but then we're talking about a difficult topic. There's anywhere from 13 to 16 of us gathered for conversation. Others want to throw things in. We probably are getting close to the last 10 minutes or so of our discussion. So if anyone has something they're wanting to contribute or feels has been unsaid or something you want to challenge us on going forward, we'd really appreciate hearing that.
Just a quick question about the 2025 resource. You said it was online. Is there a limit number of songs that goes into this online platform? Like, is it like 14,000 or is it the usual 1,000 or?
It's a good question. We're doing the online platform so we can continue to add to it. We've been hampered in United Church by having a good searchable index, liturgical, scriptural index, etc., for Voices United. And then for More Voices, we chose to do that online. So at morevoices.ca, you can still access an index. So part of the desire to do this was to give us a way of being able to index and make available everything that's in our current published collections. So that's the core purpose of the new platform, is to make everything in Nos Voix Unies, More Voices, and Voices United available in one place, all equally searchable. And then this becomes a vehicle for further delivery of new repertoire as years go on. So we are looking at a small collection of new material going up when this platform launches, 200, 250 songs, something like the size of More Voices. But that won't limit it. We can go beyond that and grow beyond that as years go on, add to the collection. And there will be, for congregations that are still using just print, there will be an option for being able to get a print supplement of the new material so that people can use it in their current technological context in their congregation. But because this is finally, we're seeing some partnership between hymn publishing companies. It's Hope Publishing and GIA who are partnering with us on this collection, and it's the first time they have worked together rather than as rivals. So Hope is handling our engraving and the preparation of materials, and GIA through one license is handling the delivery. So we at the United Church will host an indexing system, but the content itself will be hosted through the one license system, so that you'll be able to access the full repertoire that we are putting out there in our collections, but also you'll have full access to everything else that is available through one license. But the push to be able for this particular conversation, the push to get all copyrights honored and listed and get royalties flowing to places in the world where they should flow is a big part of what we are pushing for, and we're getting a yes from one license on that they will work extra hard for that. That's part of what we were trying to do in More Voices too, was not just erase the commercial copyrights, Western copyrights on songs from other parts of the world, but reinvest those copyrights. And if a song is a traditional song, then why not invest a copyright? We can't, if it's a public domain song, there's not much we can do because it's public domain. But if we can invest the arrangement, the paraphrase, and so on in a service organization from that context, in a church community that we partner with, in it's some way of making sure that royalties flow through and can be helpful and help to serve the community the music came from. So that's all part of this project too. I don't know if that helps a little bit, Matt, but. Anyone else? Questions that are arising? Resources you need? I know in terms of follow-up, we will be posting this webinar on our YouTube channel, and I'll put an article up on the Music United website. Just a second article showing the link to the channel and a link to some resources and things like that to continue the conversation. But this does, as Jason has said in the comment, this certainly feels like the first of a series of conversations, because we do need to help our church engage with this issue. We say we're a justice church. You survey United Church people regarding what's the most important issue for them, and they'll usually say justice. And yet this whole notion of how we worship and how we are as community is a blind spot for many of us in the church. Okay. Have we accomplished our task for the day, Jason?
Yeah, I think that's okay. A lot of thinking for us to go away with. Thanks, Bruce, for facilitating it. Thanks for being here, everyone. Yeah, we have some hard work to do. So,
yes, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great week.
Many blessings, and we'll carry on the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.